It has never yet been known that an innocent person has been punished on suspicion of witchcraft, and there is no doubt that God will never permit such a thing to happen. Malleus Maleficarum.
Common methods of execution for convicted witches were hanging, drowning, and burning. Burning was often favored, as it was considered a more painful way to die. Witch hunts lasted from about 1400 to 1775 in Europe and Colonial America. The exact number of executed is unknown. Some scholars estimate it between 3 to 4 million. Roughly 90% of the prosecuted have been women. Men were most often bewitched, subject to women's evil designs. Those very few men convicted of witchcraft often had political ambitions, which conflicted with those of the church or a monarch. The witch craze was clearly serving a political purpose of the consolidation of power. It can't be ignored, though, that the hunts were not just sex-related, in that most of the accused were women, but also sex-specific. Victims suffered precisely because they were women. In 1484, Pope Innocent VIII issued the bull in which he deplored the spread of witchcraft in Germany and authorized inquisitors Heinrich Kramer and James Sprenger to eradicate it. The Pope also asked them to systematize trial procedures and sentencing. As a result, Sprenger and Kramer wrote Malleus Maleficarum in 1494. Hammer of Witches in Latin was the handbook on witchcraft and its eradication until well into the 18th century. Malleus was dedicated to the implementation of Exodus 22:18. You shall not permit a sorceress to live. Second only to the Bible, it was a best-selling book for over a century. It was found in every courtroom. It was theology, it was law. According to the book, several major concerns of 15th century Catholic theology were: Question 1. Whether the belief that there are such beings as witches is so essential a part of the Catholic faith that obstinacy to maintain the opposite opinion manifestly savors of heresy. Whether witches may work some prestidigitator illusion so that the male organ appears to be entirely removed and separate from the body. That witches who are midwives in various ways kill the child conceived in the womb and procure abortion. Starting with Eve, women were always marginalized in Abrahamic religions. Even in paradise, carnality, lust, greed, intellectual inferiority, and stupidity earmark Eve's character. God had created her in a way which left her defenseless against the wiles of the snake. The snake approached her for that very reason. Yet her sin was greater than Adam's. The focus on sexuality is at the heart of the Malleus Maleficarum. The writings point to the supposedly more deviant nature of women's sexual behavior, and specifically to the belief that women are sexually insatiable, and therefore more likely to have sexual relations with the devil than are men. The most obvious proof of the sexual nature of Malleus Maleficarum and the oppression it served had to do with the witches' most frequent crimes. They cast spells over the phallus so that it disappeared entirely. Sprenger and Kramer spend a lot of time proving that witches do not actually remove the genital, only make it invisible. The vast majority of the accused women were over the age of 40, and especially single women, that is, widows, spinsters, separated, divorced, and deserted women. They were perceived as no longer having the restraint on their sexual behavior scared of pregnancy, and single women or widows did not have the restraint of a husband. As a result, in these women, the natural female carnal lust, which had been identified in the Malleus Maleficarum, was particularly likely to be out of control. Additionally, by looking at the possible criminal histories of the women accused, some of them had previously been accused of sexual offenses. Whether or not it was the main purpose of it, witch hunts were an effective tool in the hands of the Catholic Church to control women's sexuality. The Holy Inquisition worked hard. It exterminated the Cathari, Knights Templars, the Christian organization of knighthood, which had become too powerful and wealthy. It had become independent of clergy and kings. With these experiences under its expanding belt, the Inquisition in the 15th century turned to the persecution of all of those who still clung to the old cult beliefs of pagan Europe. 1320 was a crucial moment in history when the link between sorcery, heresy, and ultimately also witchcraft was formally established. The Pope, disturbed by reports that were reaching him concerning the practice of ritual magic at the papal court at Avignon, decided that the time had come to clarify and define the relationship between magic and heresy. An understanding of what the old religion really was, how it functioned, is crucial if we want to understand the precise nature of the witch hunt. The religion was organized with geographic integrity. Communities had their own organizations, mainly structured in covens. There were large gatherings, called sabbats, where many covens met together for totemic festivities. The religious ceremony, which was the main content of the sabbat, included dancing, eating, and sexual intercourse. The worshippers paid homage to the horned god by kissing his representative, the master of the coven, anywhere he indicated. The origins of the witch cult may have appeared as a faith designed to worship the horned god, a combination of Cernunnos, a horned god of the Celts, and the Greco-Roman Pan. This deity provided the prototype for later Christian conceptions of the devil. It's no surprise his worshippers, the remaining pagans refusing to convert to Christianity, were cast by the church as witches. Before the scientific revolution took hold, occurrences such as paralysis, a sudden seizure, or a baby born ill or disfigured left people looking for an explanation, and preferably someone to blame. Women employed in healing occupations were in a vulnerable position. When children or mothers died during childbirth, as often happened, these nurses made easy targets. If they had the power to help, then by extension, they had the power to harm. One of the logical explanations for the witch hunts is for control of healing. During the period of witch persecutions, medicine was getting established as the legitimate form of healing, backed by the church and state, while the healing carried out by the peasant wives, women was outlawed as heresy. Prior to the 14th century, the medical needs of the community had been served primarily by female healers or wise women. These women, who were faithful to the pagan cults, developed the science of organic medicine using vegetation before there was any notion of the profession of medicine. Paracelsus, the most famous physician of the Middle Ages, claimed that everything he knew he had learned from the good women. Experimenting with herbs, women learned that those which would kill when administered in large doses had curative powers when administered in smaller amounts. Unfortunately, it is as poisoners that the witches are remembered. They also pioneered the development of analgesics. They performed abortions, provided all medical help for births, were consulted in cases of impotence, which they treated with herbs and hypnotism, and were the first practitioners of euthanasia. Since the Church enforced the curse of Eve by refusing to permit any alleviation of the pain of childbirth, it was left to the witches to lessen pain and mortality as best they could. It was especially as midwives that these learned women offended the Church, for, as Sprenger and Kramer wrote, no one does more harm to the Catholic faith than midwives. It was also said that midwives were able to remove labor pains from the woman and transfer those pains to her husband, clearly in violation of divine injunction and intention both. Conclusion. The purpose of this video essay was to explain the phenomenon of witch hunts and demonstrate the many layers below it. Through witch hysteria, the Church did strengthen its power, for once and for all, finally defeated paganism, got rid of political threats among them. Joan of Arc and Urbain Grandier, who was the victim of a politically motivated prosecution led by the powerful Cardinal Richelieu. Though I don't imply that the goal of the Catholic Church was to punish women for original sin, fact states that in order to reach its main end of consolidating the power in Northern Europe, the Inquisition brutally walked over the most vulnerable group of that era, the women. We have seen the historical dimensions of a myth of feminine evil, which resulted in the slaughter of several million persons, nearly all women over 300 years. Marginalized by society and religion equally, secondary citizens that Church sacrificed, and so unimportant that the history simply forgot about them, the women. The least we can do is to acknowledge the greatness of the tragedy of Gynocide.